Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Pastor Megan Rohr in San Francisco at Grace Lutheran Church, www.gracesf.com. We worship every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. online and in person.
Good morning, good day, hello, whenever you are watching this. I'm Pastor Amanda Zanzalo. I serve at Central Lutheran Church in downtown Northeast Portland on the corner of 21st and Schuyler. Our worship services are at 10:15 every Sunday morning with some awesome adult education. You can learn all about it at www.centralportland.org.
All right, yeah. John Stevens, pastor of Zion Lutheran in Oregon City, Oregon. We worship at 10 for one more Sunday, and then we go to summer hours at 9 a.m. And, hey, we serve communion every Sunday, so come and check us out.
Next, our new panelist here today joining us for the first time is...
I am Finn, and I'm here in Portland, Oregon. I'm a mission developer with the Oregon Synod, with the synodically authorized worshiping community called Queering Sacred Spaces, doing ministry within the LGBTQ community.
Welcome, Finn. Thank you so much for joining us. It is awesome to have you here. So Finn is a new mission developer, and if you would like to learn more about Queering Sacred Spaces, I believe that the website is www.queeringsacredspaces.org. Org? All right. Awesome. Thank you, Finn.
Thanks.
Totes. So we have lots of choices in the readings. It seems like most people are looking at the Trinity text. I'll include them all down here in the link below if you're watching us from the Just Lutheran blog. I'm probably going to be doing Pentecost, so I might throw in my 2 cents from the Pentecost direction every once in a while. And just to throw us all off, John likes to just go off rogue and preach about whatever the heck he feels like, and so he'll be talking about Psalm 1.
It's the narrative lectionary, and they used to just run the Psalms for the part of the summer, so we're doing Psalm 1. So I'm only rogue as well as the other people are rogue. So,
so super rogue.
Yeah,
anyway.
As rogue as a Lutheran can be. Anyway.
Just saying. Yeah. Do you want to start with Isaiah?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's start with Isaiah.
Isaiah.
Which is down here, right below, if you would like to read it.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a weird text. It's a text about this guy who's feeling really bad about himself. My favorite thing to notice at the beginning of this text is the way that the Hebrew uses the word feet to mean a euphemism for genitals. Maybe you won't preach about this on Sunday, but it's just fun to know in Bible study. Word feet means genitals. So the angel has 6 hands, 2 worshiping God, 2 pointed towards the earth, and 2 to cover their feet. That's fun, right?
Probably not a preachable point.
What? I don't know. I think that if there are lots of types of bodies in this world, and the same way that we say that shoe sizes go from 1 to 13, even though we need all kinds of expensive insoles and things to fit because we have all these feet problems, and I think the truth is that our feet are much more diverse than just those shoe sizes, and when you think of feet as a euphemism, you get a whole trans sermon out of that. Just because you don't preach about it, Amanda, doesn't mean it's not there.
It could be. It's totally there. Totally there.
Just saying. Fun thing to notice. Yep. Anyone else want to talk about feet? No?
No, I think you got it. It's good.
My favorite part about this Bible study is when I say something that's out there or awkward or on the edge, and then I say, so what do you think, Finn? And then someone has to respond to whatever.
Yeah. No, I totally want to talk about feet.
Yeah! Feet!
Feet are awesome.
I just think it's fun to notice the parts
of
the text.
To know where they are.
Yeah, there's a lot of coded texts that speak to diverse people, and if you don't know the code words, you don't know how queer and awesome the Bible is. Woohoo!
And so understanding, I agree. I mean, I think that understanding that feet in the Old Testament often refers to genitals is important and is a very, especially when you're looking at things like Ruth and Ruth sitting at his feet and different situations like that, it can get really interesting.
Wait, you mean when her mom-in-law said that if she woke up with his foot in her hand, that he'd have to marry her? What?
You know, those feet.
Oh, feet.
Oh,
It's
feet.
important to know where your feet are. It's always
Yes.
important.
Very
Sometimes
important.
a cigar is just a cigar. So.
Oh, too soon and yet not soon enough. Look that up,
to
people.
the rest of Isaiah's text.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, okay, so it's a story of people who are thinking very critically about themselves. Maybe they deserved it. Probably they deserved it if you look at the historical stuff, that they should have wanted to repent. But we also know lots of stories of people who only see the negative in themselves and have a hard time accepting forgiveness. So you can kind of go either way with what's going on in this text. But it's a very weird way of proving that this person has forgiveness and that God is accepting them the way they are. Their body perhaps gets altered, right? And so this hot coal is picked up by tongs and placed on the lips of someone to show them that God is with them, that God has transformed them, and that they are healed. And unlike the invisible mark of water on your forehead during baptism, if I got touched by a hot coal, I would have a scar left. And so I'm wondering if this is a way of having a visible sign that God forgives you. And sometimes we notice that by the scars that are left from really difficult circumstances that we've lived through. And I don't want to glorify it, but there are some people who find release through pain, through cutting, by leaving a tangible mark of what's going on in their life. I don't know, is this a biblical example of someone who is a cutter, who needs a tangible sign that God has forgiven them? As a Lutheran, I like to read it and say, it's redemptive, it's fantastic, but we have a whole Christian history of people who have done painful and things that have crossed the boundaries of violence in order to know that God has loved them. They're nuns who used to hit themselves and leave scars on their back. There's lots of people who have carried around the weight of hateful words that people have said that and have felt like they needed to pray away whatever list of things they were told was bad, and it leaves a mark, it leaves a toll. Even if you come to the other side and you see that baptism is forgiveness and that no matter how many ways we could screw it up, God can still love us, sometimes we still carry those scars. So I don't know. That's a lot of cans of worms to throw up in the air. I kind of feel like I want to be like, cutting. What do you think, Amanda?
Thanks, Megan.
No?
Well, you know, I think it's an interesting comparison to take the two and to kind of lift them up together. This text for me is an interesting text personally because this was one of my ordination texts. This was the Old Testament text that I chose for my ordination. And it's because I spent a large portion of a semester working with it for an oral interpretation class in college. So one of the courses that I took in college was about public speaking and the oral interpretation of written word in public places. And I competed in this in high school as well. And so I spent a lot of time learning how to read this passage aloud well, probably about a month and a half to 2 months. And so I spent a lot of time with it, and it was it was right after my baptism. And we had to choose a biblical text to practice and to use, and I asked the chaplain of the university who had baptized me the year before, or maybe it could have been just the semester before, for suggestion of a text. And this is the text that he recommended to me. And so I think that I have very, very often and very frequently throughout my history with this particular text focused on the second portion of the text, where we have the response to the call, and the response to
the part where no one listens and they're not able to ever hear what you're going to say.
Right. And the part where they need to hear the story, and so who will go for me and who will tell my story? And the response of this individual who's had this searing experience, who says, "Here am I, send me." So that was a really powerful, a very powerful text to be handed immediately after being marked with the water of baptism, the invisible scar of that. And so there was definitely, this text for me definitely has an intrinsic portion of my call to it. But I think it is interesting to take a look at what does it mean that this individual is physically scarred. And when we look at folks who engage in self-harm behaviors, cutting and burning and other activities in order to try to express the pain that they're experiencing, or as a release, there's as many people as there are who engage in self-harm behaviors. There are reasons for engaging in it, and purposes, and the way in which it is helpful or unhelpful for the individual. And I think it's a culture and it's a conversation that's very, very, very hard to have, because those who engage in the behavior, it's a way of surviving and getting through some very difficult experiences. And for those who are caring for those who engage in that behavior, I think it is very difficult to understand why they're doing it. And so for us, in the same way I could enter into this, why is it important that this person has burnt lips? I would have a difficult time understanding why that is an important part of their journey, and yet clearly it is an important part of their journey. So anyone have any thoughts on any of those things?
So I have some thoughts about the text and that idea that there's something that's going to clean someone, that's going to leave a mark, and that for me, it goes back to what I'm recalling is more like a reparative therapy, that there's something unclean about me. I live amongst this community that is unclean. How do I clean myself? How does that happen? And so quite honestly, I really don't like this text because it feels really crappy. I live amongst the people that are unclean. How do I get clean? I get clean by holding a live coal, by hurting myself, by changing myself into something else. And I don't find a lot of restorative text in here until I read further on in the text in Isaiah in this one short snippet. So I struggle with just looking at just this little clip and not looking at the fuller text that comes afterwards, where it calls an entire community overall into account of turning back to God. And not necessarily, this feels targeted to me. This text feels targeted to me, to this one person, either self-targeting, that there's self-hate there, or targeting as a community. But this one really feels like it's an individualized kind of self-hate that's going on there. And I see Megan nodding a lot.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to read it that way, and then I think it's also, like, the book of Isaiah is all about agreeing with you when you're really pissed off that people have done shitty things to you or unjust things to you, and kind of, I talk about this a lot, but kind of goes into a wave of, like, there's injustice, I'm pissed off, get rid of it all, and get rid of it all with fire and burning and knives and killing, and then it's like, all right, well, I guess you're God, and you've got this bigger plan than I understand, blah, 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 you're great. But there's still injustice, and fix it all. And like, so it kind of keeps going into this kind of mood swing that I think is very natural to how we are in the world. If you want to look at this from a purely kind of Lutheran standpoint, knowing that we are people who always see bigger, crappier things in other people, for some of us see it more in ourselves. This is... Even if you think you're the most important person in the world, if you think that you're, you know, a king or a fancy person, and you think the rest of society is completely unjust, this is a text that reminds us there's always a part of ourselves that needs to be repaired and to become more just as well. And so if you think about how, yes, society is super screwed up, way more screwed up than I am screwed up, but there's still a little bit of me that also needs to be purified. And so when I compare it to stories where it's like, and then this righteous person came and said, you're gonna die because you stink, right? When I compare it to those kind of texts, I like this better because I like that there's a little bit of self, like, oh, there's a bit of me, right? And it's inching ever closer, ever closer, ever closer to this idea that we're all saints and sinners, right? That's the big Lutheran payoff line. And even if this person gets it just a little bit, the whole city is horrible. It needs to be burnt to the ground. And if even 1 inch of it is left, we need to burn that too because they're so unjust. That this person is just at the beginning of their realization that we are tangled up in these systems of oppression and systems of injustice, that a little bit of them needs to be purified as well. And I think when you learn how connected you are to other people and the part that you also play in the racism that you're protesting or in the sexism that you're protesting and the ways that we sometimes when we get the justice we seek enact that same injustice that was enacted on us on other people, that's a deeper kind of sitting with how to be just people in the future and how to think about how to live as godly people. Because if we think about in even just the history of LGBT faithful folk, you know, we had a lot to complain about because it seemed like everyone was against us. But then the racism in our own community and the ways that we turn a blind eye to poverty in our community or haven't figured out how to deal with youth homelessness or suicide or the drug addiction problems. And I think there's stuff we all have to work on. And if I view this text from a point of this is someone starting to get it, I like it better than if it's a text about like self-harm, which I should also mention, if you are someone for whom self-harm is your coping mechanism, Kate Bornstein has a great book, 101 Alternatives to Suicide for Geeks, Freaks, and Others, something like that. I'll put a link to it down here. It's a good resource. If self-harm is one of your things, there's also other options that might work better for you or be safer, but at least it reminds you that you're not alone. Anyway, John?
So I find it,
no, go ahead, Finn.
So I find it really amazing that there's this turnaround in the text that we start with, woe is me, I am lost, I am unclean, and then all of a sudden it's wait a second, I hear a voice.
Yeah.
And that voice is calling me. And that's that moment of where everything gets completely turned around. Is this event happens, I am cleaned, and now I can hear with clean ears, and here I am. Not changed, but here I am.
And what's the message? Is the message when you get that call after being long smited to say, join me, others who feel this way? Or is it to turn and say, now you all are going to get it? Which
now,
is
here's your call.
The poor choice that happens here, right?
Yeah.
You can be angry your whole life about the bad things that happen to you, or you can live the apology you wish someone gave to you. And so I think there's lots of people who, who, especially in the LGBT community about faith, is you can be mad that people changed their policies but never apologized, or you can live that apology to everyone else you see. You can be at church to be the usher and to be the greeter and to be the one that proves that time has changed and that's over.
I think it can also be a both and situation there, that it can be both and rather than either or, which is something we do a lot as Lutherans. But we haven't heard anything from John yet. John, anything to say? I know you're preaching Psalm 1, but anything to say about Isaiah text?
Yeah, what we say matters.
There you go.
And with this this ritual going on of purifying my lips of what I say is can be the word of the Lord. And when we are called to speak the prophetic word, and it's called to speak the word of grace and love, what we say matters. And so here's this this ritual, how literal we take it, we can go with that, but we have this ritual going on where he's getting purified to speak the word. And so I think for me it just reminds me that what we say matters, and it can be a holy word, it can be a hurting word, and so we watch that which comes from our lips. And so here we are.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And if
That's
you're doing
actually-
go ahead, Amanda.
It reminded me that's actually like the name of my blog.
What?
Word balancing. Because what we say and how we say it matters. So I hadn't remembered. I mean, I haven't really paid attention to the name and the sentiment of the titling of my blog for a really long time. So thanks for pointing that out.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and if you want an alternative text, if this one is a little too violent or a little too burn 'em to the ground for you, you can always choose the text for Pentecost 1 if you're not doing the Trinity slant. That is about the moment when Samuel hears the voice of God, which has to say it over and over and over and over again. And a man who's hard of hearing has to tell Samuel to listen for it. You have to ignore the fact that Samuel's life is going to maybe go a little wonky after this moment, which is the story of almost every biblical character. But it's a little cleaner if you don't want to deal with this weird fire business.
So I do want to point out that the one of the reasons that this gets used for Trinity Sunday is verse 8, whom shall I send and who will go for us? And that, I mean, some of those things were like, let's find something that even looks like the Trinity. Oh, this verse is good. So,
and Amanda, do you want to sing it right now, or you want to wait? Here I am, Lord.
Yeah.
The people who love that song. The people who hate that song, hate that song.
And guess which song I chose for the hymn of the day this week? Because it's almost inevitable, right? I mean, it's there. You can't avoid it.
You can avoid it.
I mean, you can try. You can dive under death.
You can make lots of choices. You get to make all your own choices in life.
I was going to say the one piece about this for Trinity Sunday, because we are, for folks who are not necessarily as familiar with the church year, what is happening here liturgically is we are going from the season of Easter, which ended with Pentecost Sunday, and most churches actually skip over Ascension, which happens during the middle of the week. And so Ascension is when Jesus ascends to the clouds. And then we have Pentecost, which was last week with lots of fire and exciting Holy Spirit stuff.
It's not fire, it's split tongues.
Megan and I I don't
We're
like this
fight.
thing. It's this thing. It's very fun and happy. It's not this weird thing. So Pentecost has come. The gift of the Holy Spirit has occurred. However you want to interpret that. And now we're heading into the season after Pentecost, which has sorry, I got distracted.
Can you put that back up again? Because I didn't get to see it.
A rubber ducky.
It's the CD on how to keep your church safe from fire and not have it burn down.
Avoid Pentecost?
It's split tongues. It's lesbian Sunday. It's not fire Sunday.
Okay, so
let us talents and tongues employ.
Okay, so we are talking about what happens after this, which is the season after Pentecost, which goes on forever and ever, not forever and ever, for a very long time throughout the summer. It's very long. It's green. You're going to see the green year. So if you know anyone who's going to be ordained or who is a pastor, if you would like to get them a gift, give them a green stole. We love the red stoles. They're beautiful, but we have 2 days we get to wear them out of the year. And oftentimes they're ordination gifts, so they're our best stole that we receive and the fanciest and the schmanciest. But we only get to wear them twice a year. So green, we wear week after week after week after week after week. So you can be very kind and generous and get a fancy schmancy green stole for someone you love. And we
wore red. We wore red the entire season of Pentecost last year to dwell in the Holy Spirit. So you get to do whatever you want. If John can preach about Psalm 1 on Sunday, you can wear red as many times as you want to.
So
right.
Totally. So as we head into green, we have Trinity Sunday, where we talk about this concept of God
how 1
being
plus 1 plus 1 equals 1.
Children don't listen. Children don't listen. That's me.
1.
So it's a very confusing theological concept, and I think that this Isaiah text is trying to get at kind of the majesty of the Creator and the majesty of the bigness of God. and we're gonna, last week we dwelt and talked a lot about the Holy Spirit and who moves in with and among, and we're gonna get some about Jesus, but it's this weird, hard concept, and I think that part of what is going on here is this big idea of the great, big, awesome Creator God.
So can we talk about the Trinity for a little while? Because I'd love to talk about the Trinity for a little while.
All right.
So the Trinity, I've been kind of playing around with this idea in general and how gender identity and the she, her, hers, he, his, and then they, them, theirs, and being like, wow, why do we keep talking about God as he? Why don't we just talk about the Trinity as they?
Yeah.
Right? Like, break that open. That whole gender piece it just needs to be broken open. And so that gender assignment to the Trinity is like, wait a second, I'm pretty sure that there probably isn't one. That it's probably pretty fluid, going one way and then the other, and then back and forth and back and forth. So just want to put that out there and get people's reactions on that. Since we're talking about Trinity Sunday.
Yeah,
I think Holy Spirit, Jesus, and God.
As someone who used they as my in-writing pronoun, I agree. But also, I think it's also biblical, because in the book of Genesis, God is plural, and if you were to translate it literally, it would be they throughout the entire book of Genesis. Although there's 3 different words for God that are used kind of throughout, and one is kind of like a Lord kind of thing, but during the creation stories, for sure, it's a they that are creating. And so I think, yes, they is appropriate. Although there are times when I like when it's he. My big example is in the book of Hosea, when the male God compares opposite sex relationship like that between a man and a prostitute who is not faithful, and holy marriage being between that of a male God and the sons of Israel. So you have kind of a same-sex metaphor going on in the book of Hosea. And then when you take the gender out of that, you miss it. But for the most part, I like they. I think it's way better than going with a he or a she. What do you think, John? Can't hear you, John. You're on mute.
There you go. Yeah.
There you go.
It's new for me, so I'm taking it in and listen. It's one of those things. As a male who has had my pronoun used all across time, there are times where one just sits and listens and takes it in and says, "All right, let's go with this." I'm not against it. It's just it's new, so I just take it in.
And I would say anyone that it's new for, there's lots of fun books on it. One that I'm reading right now is called The Chalice and the Blade, and it's about the history in Crete and how they use kind of goddess language for God, but also lived in a partnership sharing society until they were taken over by more kind of warlike folk who had more of a patriarchal system of religion, which then took over. And so if you want to read a little bit more about that, it's a very binary book. It kind of thinks there's men here and women here. So if you're kind of in the middle space of thinking about gender, just ignore that part of the book. But it's fun to think about the different ways that God is talked about in that kind of way.
Yeah, and so I mean the reference to God, etc. That very fluid and all that. For me, new gender. Pronouns and etc. Self-identifying, all that's living into it. I love the fact that I can say, yeah, I'll probably have to talk to my parents about this, because they're like, yeah, they've been cutting the edge before the edge was to cut. So I mean, I love it. So it's one of those times. It's the times where when you're hanging out, and I can go, yeah, those are my parents. I'm proud of them. So,
yeah. I had a 90-plus-year-old woman in my congregation ask me my preferred gender pronouns the other day, so it's possible of any generation, I think.
Yeah. Yep. So.
I have to say that I was excited to participate in a great training that Finn, Queering Sacred Spaces, sponsored and put on, that was led by a very gifted and talented trainer from SMIRC, which is an organization here in the Portland area that does a lot of the training and talking about gender identity and sexual orientation. And the conversation around the pronoun they, for those who are new to this as a preferred gender pronoun and who are just trying to get it into their vocabulary, a really great piece of the information that was shared was that we are actually accustomed to using the word they as a singular pronoun. If you think about the example that was given in that training, is when you're talking and someone says something along the lines of, so when you're in a training or you're in worship and you're the usher and someone walks into the door and they ask where the bathroom is and you tell them that it's right down the hallway. You're talking about one individual person who's come in the door, and you're using the they pronoun. So they have walked in the door and you tell them where the bathroom is. Mm-hmm. So it is actually something that we use in United States Standard English, but we don't recognize that we use it in a singular form very often. And so when, as an ally or as someone who is walking alongside someone else who's choosing the they pronoun as their preferred gender pronoun, I think that it helps to give that example to your brain so that you can begin to say, okay, it's not just a you plural. It's not just referring to a plural group of individuals. It can actually also be about a person. And I think that, as Finn said, in that training is when this beautiful question about the they pronoun referring to the Trinity was a really powerful question and a really awesome one to kind of break open that conversation about thinking of God as they. Finn?
We keep trying to put God into this box of, is God he, is God she, is God father, is God, and that the they just kind of opens that up and lets the image speak to the person instead of letting the words dictate the image for the person. And so I really love the concept of, we're talking about the Trinity, right? It seems completely appropriate to talk about they.
Yeah.
But we're so boxed in with our language of needing to be able to create an image for people that we assign some sort of box around God, and I don't think you can put God in a box. I'm pretty sure that God would be like, ugh.
One of the reasons the hymn "Dance of the Trinity" is one of my favorites, for that sense of that as we're trying to put God in a box, and here we have the Trinity dancing with each other, and that's just a wonderful image.
I just can't stop thinking about the song that won an Emmy about putting feet in a box. But that's really off subject. Look it up later, Amanda. Yeah, I shouldn't talk about it right now. It's very inappropriate. It does, however, remind me to the Romans 8 text. I know, shocking. If you ignore the first part before verse 18, just ignore that. Because it's like, I don't know about that part. It's very like, God's a man, Father, yay. But if you start with verse 18 and verse 19, think about gender issues and think about any sort of body images that we might have for ourselves. Anything that you think when you look in the mirror and you go, I don't know. What if the response from your mirror was, for the creation waits in eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but to the will of the one who subjected it to hope, that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage and to decay and to obtain freedom from the glory of the children of God. What if you were reminded that God wanted you to feel set free from whatever those groaning feelings are you have when you look in the mirror at your naked body, and that there is this longing for creation to bear the fruits of the Spirit, right? I mean, you can it's been translated a lot of other ways to try to tell you to conform your bodies or to ignore your bodies, right? To ignore the feelings that you have, ignore the flesh. That's kind of a Paul kind of line to say. But what if instead we read it that that we all have these groanings when we look in the mirror, but the longing of creation and the longing of the Holy Spirit is for us to feel release from that bondage, for us to feel free to look at our naked bodies with delight and with joy, and to kind of move back into that purity that happened in the garden before they kind of had shame about their bodies. Just saying. That could be good. I mean, you got to really rethink any of the biases you have about Paul and Paul's biases about the body in order to be able to read it that way. But I like it if you could get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sense of being able to look and hear those words that you are enough, that you are a...
Yeah. You are enough, and your body, like, it's not just our words that God is forgiving and healing. It's not just our memories that haunt us that God is cleansing and calming down. It's not just the actions we've done that God is transforming, but our bodies that are being made to feel good to us in whatever ways they don't feel good to us. And so I kind of like that. I think we could use some of that. With all of the blah, blah, blah that happens on TV about how to fix our bodies, people are willing to put, like, oranges on their face if someone tells them it's going to make them less wrinkly. Then why wouldn't it be exciting? And why wouldn't we try it? Dwelling in the Holy Spirit to be feeling a sense of wonder and awe and excitement about our bodies. Why not? If you're into the next Miracle Whoozy What's It thing to make your body look good, or the next Whoozy What's It diet, try the one that transforms us into looking in the mirror and feeling like our body is worth it. And that might mean doing some sit-ups to be healthy for God, or it might mean skipping the sit-ups and putting our time into loving ourselves as we are.
Well, I mean, what's coming up for me is this whole shaming aspect of society, and I was just thinking of the TED Talk that Brene, is that, what's her, yeah, that does, she has
Brene Brown.
Brene Brown.
Brene Brown, just absolutely. When I first saw that, it was just transformative, in the sense of, this idea of shaming and vulnerability, and there's just, it's pretty damn powerful. So I'm just saying.
Yeah, if folks aren't familiar with that, we should link that one down here. The Power of Vulnerability by Brene Brown is a really intensely powerful TED Talk, I think, that gets tossed around a lot. People who have watched it and have heard it find it incredibly powerful in kind of reclaiming power in vulnerability. I mean, the title kind of says it all. But unfortunately, you're not going to hear that portion of the text in most services this week because the lectionary ends at verse 17. So a lot
That's why 18 is better.
Yeah, I hear that. And
so can we lobby for that?
Yeah, just, I mean, who makes your bulletin? Just put it in there.
I mean, if I can read Psalm 1...
Yeah! Take back the night and your text.
You can certainly, I mean, for folks who are doing worship planning and those kinds of pieces, if you have, especially early enough in the week that your bulletin isn't printed, or if you have enough control over the situation to be able to contact your lectors and those kinds of pieces, you can make those changes and have more of the texts read. It's easy with the gospel as the preaching individual to add or subtract out of the gospel reading. You have to do a little bit more planning ahead if you want to add or subtract out of the first lessons. Because
you just make it the first couple lines of your sermon.
You can
look where our reading stopped. Isn't it silly? Let me read it right now.
You can do that. That's one way to go. But I think it also encourages a little bit of planning ahead on our part when we want to change things up like that.
I find it interesting that this is Trinity Sunday, yet I feel like all of these texts are very fleshy.
Yes.
There is a lot of flesh going on in these texts. There's, the struggle between flesh and spirit, the coal on the lips, there's the being born again in John, and it's all very fleshy. I don't see a lot of Trinity in there. I see a lot of experience of human flesh with the divine.
Which, I mean, ultimately, when we get the whole doctrine of the Trinity because someone's trying to explain or figure out how God interacts with us. And so we have God as creator, and we see that we've got as so it does seem to fit with this fleshy idea. But I hadn't noticed the flesh in there. That's interesting. I'm like, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, the other alternative you can do is you can use the 2 Corinthians text, which is the Pentecost 1 reading, which is, again, the kinder, gentler, softer side of the readings. It's, we are made of clay jars, and isn't it great that God loves us? Way easier, maybe, than slavery talk, which is why I skipped the beginning of the Roman stuff.
Can I make one more comment on the Romans text before we move on? And mainly because I have 3 children and all of them are adopted, and there's not a lot of images out there in the world in general. If you look at movies, you look at images about adopted kids and wicked stepmothers and wicked stepfathers and the evilness that happens to these children when they're adopted. And this is one of the only places that being adopted into a family is a really amazing experience. And so I want to lift that up, that this is really great text to talk about that. We call it our forever family. So that's how we refer to our adoptions of our 3 kids, is that we are their forever family. They have another biological family, but we are their forever family. And that's what this is. This is being born into the forever family. The forever family of God. And so while I feel like it's really fleshy, I also want to point out that there's that piece too, and that there are people sitting in the congregation who need to hear that message because it is not spoken. I can't think of one time in my own experience in the church of my children hearing an experience of what it's like to be adopted and what that means for somebody to, in essence, choose you as your child, and that, like, as we have been chosen by God. So liberation in there for lots and lots of people.
Yeah, Joseph being the mightiest of adopters in terms of his ability to do that, if we're thinking of Bible stories. Part of the reason that you don't hear a lot of sermons about adoption is there was a time period where people were very strong into the idea of adoption, and it went far into a side where there was something called the heresy of adoptionism that was created. I'll put a link up to it. It's not really that interesting, but that's part of the reason that people don't talk about adoption as much as they ought to. Adoption. Woot woot. John, do you want to talk about John? I don't know why anyone would pick John over Mark, but that's just me.
Or Psalm 1. I mean, do you want to talk about Psalm 1 for a minute?
Yeah. Well,
What's in Psalm 1?
The thing about Psalm 1, and actually I'm thinking about going back in that adoption language, and Psalm 1 talks about the happy are those who are like the tree planted by the stream of life.
Yeah, I like that part.
And I love that image that we're rooted in, then talking about that those aren't. It's a very either or both and text, but that sometimes we're like chaff that's blown away in the wind, and sometimes we're rooted. And I like the fact that both of them are affected by the wind, about what comes and goes, but those that have roots and drink from their life source, are connected. But I'm coming back to the idea of that adoption, that there are language about being grafted into the tree of life, and that we're part of this, and that's has this adoptive image that someone chose to graft us in there, and that we are where we normally would not be connected to someone. Someone said you're now part of us. And that's a great image. So that's my take on Psalm 1. Back to you.
My favorite part of Psalm 1 is the piece about happy are those who follow the way, because I get all nerdy about the early church and the beginning of the church,
right.
And because I tend to get nerdy about the beginning of the church and the early church, and their rituals and who they were and how they did and those kinds of things before it became legal under Constantine, and it being the faith. And the earliest Christians were called the followers of the way. They weren't called Christians yet. They were followers of the way. And if you look in this Psalm 1, you see part of where that came from. And
Well,
happy are
yeah,
those who follow the
and
way.
right.
Say that again,
Yeah,
John?
in Psalm 1, in Psalm 1 it has the two roads, and there's one that follows this path and the other that follows this. And I cannot help but when I read Psalm 1, I think of Yogi Berra that said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. And but that's that image where that's that both and, that saint and sinner, because that's the difficulty is that text makes it so cut and dry, yet we know when we live in life it's not cut and dry. And so, but yeah, I love the use of the word "the way." It's yeah. But
there's something about it. I think I appreciate the sense of the journey of it. I appreciate the sense of the openness of it. And I think I also appreciate that the modern contemporary baggage that comes with, yes, I'm a Christian, is a lot easier to talk about. Yeah, I'm a follower of the way.
Right.
And I also show my extreme bias and preference to make certain that I understand that I'm rooted in the depth of history of faith, because that's crucial to my understanding of why I am a person of faith and why I choose Lutheran faith to be a part of, because I find that need to connect with generations of the ancient, something that's very important to my own expression of spirituality and my experience of God, so that when I am praying the Lord's Prayer, or when I am presiding at communion and we are singing the Holy, 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 which connects us to this Isaiah passage, I understand that these are pieces that have been done for centuries by billions of people who are all followers of the way, regardless of what their denominational titles may be or their denominational claims may be. So though I am Lutheran, I am a follower of the way. Though I have family who are Catholics, they are followers of the way. And if I can grab onto that and hold that, I break down some walls and open up the journey a little more. So
and it becomes a journey. It doesn't become a static thing. It becomes a walk. It becomes a journey. It becomes an adventure, which is my favorite word. It's not static. You're moving through it. You're moving with other people as well.
Right.
That's right. And it's very similar to what's going on in the Mark text from the Pentecost reading.
You are the master of segues, Megan.
The Sabbath was made for human.
Sean wants to say.
Before we move from Psalm 1, because I want you to link to add a link to a poem by Mary Oliver called "Why I Wake Early," because it's a fantastic poem. But the end part of that poem is, "Watch now how I start the day in happiness, in kindness." But the whole poem, it linked to it, because the poem speaks Psalm 1, and actually I read it and I'm actually getting more Trinity imagery as well, but you might have to stretch a little bit. But anyway, back to what was it, Mark? You were saying?
Mark. Ooh, Mark. Well, no, because it just the key line to lift from the Pentecost reading is the Sabbath was made for humankind and not humankind for the Sabbath. This permission to be adventurous, the permission to find our own way, not to just try to relive the scriptures. And I think what I like to talk about is this idea that our sacred biblical scriptures continue. We might have a canon of different stories that we read on Sundays, and even between us, you can see with 4 different pastors, we even pick and choose which ones of those we want to read. But that our stories, our lives that we live, add to this canon. And when we tell our stories of faith, we're adding to these sacred texts. And our stories are just as valid and might prove just as useful for others to hear them. Some people call that a testimony, and that's jarring for some to hear, because they think they mean at the end of the testimony they're going to tell you, and that's why you should believe my chosen list of rules or God won't love you. But it just means sharing your own faith story. That's right, John. I take your bobblehead Luther and I raise you a skinny Luther. Oh, skinny Luther. So anyway, Trinity, let's now spend some time talking about the very confusing text, which is John chapter 3, which will be the Trinity reading, where you get to hear very enlightening things that explain exactly how God works by saying things like, flesh is flesh, spirit is spirit. Makes sense.
With the tone, too. I like it. Yeah, flesh is that way.
Flesh is flesh and spirit is spirit. God, 1 + 1 + 1, 1. Makes sense.
That's your children's sermon, right?
Done. Yeah, if I ever have a children come, that will be their children's sermon.
Because that's children. What I always worry about on Trinity Sunday. I have to be honest. It's like the part that gives me the most anxiety about Trinity Sunday is how do you do a children's sermon and not totally destroy their foundation in math?
Talk about a train.
Check out your children's sermon this week.
That's what I need to do. Thank you, John. And we should link that.
With the kids, it just doesn't. So it's a whole different take on God wanting to party with us. So.
Ooh.
Yep.
Or you could just have a train that has 3 cars on it.
There's a really great video about St. Patrick and the Trinity conversation that goes that is trying to. John, you know which one I'm talking about? That's like, no, that's modalism. No, you can't do that. It's awesome. It is fantastic. It's hilarious. We should link it down here somewhere. Right. Megan, I'll see if I can find that for you, and I should actually just post it on my Facebook feed as a, hey everybody, welcome to Trinity Sunday. It's going to be all sorts of heretical. But the Nick at Night text, this Nicodemus text, is really tough because it's one of those that has a verse that could be on your wall. A verse that is at the end zone. It has John 3:16 in it. So half the time, I think, once we hear one of those texts, and I've said this before on other BSTDS sessions, where once we hear those verses, we don't hear anything else, right? Like, oh, for God so loved the world, and then half the congregation is sitting in their Sunday school classroom with whatever teacher it was that had them memorize this verse, and they're no longer present in the room, and they're no longer wrestling with the Scripture. And
which is why it's important to get to 17.
But people don't necessarily even go there because they're so remembering, I remember what my Sunday school room smelled like, and I was wearing a purple shirt when I actually was able to recite this correctly for the first time.
And there were bugs in the plants.
In
1968.
And they're not present in the room anymore, and you've lost them, or they're sitting there thinking about, oh, those people in the end zones at the football games and all of the ways in which that theology has been painful, right? They're no longer in the room to hear verse 14, 15, 16, and 17 because they're so caught by the memory of what this one particular verse has triggered. So if I were to edit the texts this week, I'll be honest, I would either stop it before or start it after 16, just so that I could get people to be present in the room and hear more than just one triggering verse.
Or the possibility of naming that before even reading it, saying, we're going to get to here and you're going to go elsewhere, but stay with me. Stay with me, and then we can,
Yeah.
I always think in the born again text too, if you're ever going to say that being born out of your mom's womb wasn't enough for being born, never say that to your mom, right? I get this. It's great if you're preaching about adoption. It works really awesome. If you're preaching with your mom in the room, you're in big trouble, right? It's just it's convoluted and messy, and being born again is a tricky thing that has been harmful to some people, and so it's just a whole big confusing smattering. Grace Lutheran, we're reading Mark. Woohoo!
I'm shocked.
The wind blows where it chooses, and thus is God.
Yeah, that's an easier text.
Explain that.
Right. Yeah.
Explain it. I'm God and you're not. That would have been shorter.
Shall we go on to final words?
Can we talk about being born again? Because I think that there's some value in there. Because I think it needs to be reclaimed for a lot of people. And so I'm searching for where the reclaiming is in this text. for people who may have a kind of that being washed in the Spirit, being washed in the blood, all of those pieces. So reaction there.
In San Francisco, like I did a lot of preaching at St. Francis Lutheran, where they were actually kicked out of the Lutheran Church for being for hiring gay pastors in the midst of the AIDS crisis, because they knew that was the kinds of pastors that were needed for that community. They do a lot of talking about chosen families, and even if your families loved you and stood with you, this idea that you might choose to be a part of a community and love people by choice in your adult life that might have nothing to do with blood relationships, I think is something like what the church is up to, certainly in our communion, where part of the reason that we drink wine that is maybe or maybe not in with and through blood is to create these lines of kinship amongst each other in our chosen families that might or might not exist in our families of origin or our families of birth. And it's finding forever family however we find forever family. But there are ways in which we are born again and again and again. Like, if you have ever had different names in your life because at one time you were known as Johnny Boy or whatever was your nickname when you were little, and then you had a new name when you went to college, and there's people in your life who know you of that name, and then you get a new name in your professional life, then you kind of understand that you can remake your life and have different segments of your life. Some as profound as transitioning and having a really visual change in your life, and some as simple as just transforming from having a lot of shame and doubt and living a life with a pessimistic worldview to something shifting, and now you see the world with hope and optimism. And for some people that's the shift that they experience when they become parents. For some people that's a shift that they experience when they finally become an adult, whatever that is. For some people, it's a shift that they make as they go through puberty. I've seen little kids even make that shift when they have an aha moment that something that didn't feel good to them is happening to other people and they want to respond to it. And so I think there's lots of ways that we're born again, or that we're transformed, or that we reinvent ourselves. And it's a freedom thing to think about how you can not be trapped into, or frozen in time would be the way to think about it. If you've ever had a friend and you haven't seen them in forever and they think you think all the same jokes were funny, but you've changed in between the time when you've seen them, but their memory of you is frozen in time, and so they treat you that same way that you used to be. We all transform, and we all kind of go through these moments of shifting, and to think that being born again means that you will all be born into the same person with the same rules and the same haircut and the same outlook on faith is not how being born works, right? When we're born, we're kind of this miraculous combination of this particular sperm and this particular ovum, and the ways that all the genes of your ancestors funnel through into this perfect combination. And if you're being born again, you're not going to come out looking like a gingerbread cookie cutter. You're going to come out rolling the dice again with the genes of all of those biblical ancestors of faith trickling down into you. And you might have a little bit of David and a little bit of Ruth and a little bit of Samuel and a little bit of Jeremiah, God forbid, right? And they all kind of come out into this new spiritual person that you are born into. And if we think of it just like you need to look like the Duggars, then that works until it's revealed that they have all of the same problems and issues that sparkle down through all of these biblical characters, right? You find biblical characters who did similar inappropriate things, but it's when we pretend that that's not true, or we whitewash moments, or we try to edit the story in a way that makes people look perfect, that we have problems. And so now they're being born again into a new kind of family that's going to live into this new kind of honesty, and a different kind of authenticity in the world. And we don't want to freeze them in time and think of them as a scandal and always in that scandal moment, because just like us, they get the opportunity to grow and change and circle around in the same way that we do. So,
yeah, so I love that. I love that text in there, in that it's like it's God kind of blowing us into away from fear and letting us go with the Spirit. And so that's the piece that I would really like to reclaim, is that it's God saying it's okay to be reborn again and to change and transform, because that's what I'm calling you to be. I'm calling you to change and transform in creation, in the world. And here, I don't know where we're going, but here's the Spirit. Let it carry you, let it lift you and change you and be born again, because I think that is what it feels like, is being like, wow, like it's the same place, but wow, it looks a lot different than it did yesterday.
Because we're not afraid of snakes anymore.
No, because we lift them up in the wilderness. Yes, the wild.
We wear sandals and snakes are scary. Let's become conquered over that.
You know, you're talking about when we like keeping people trapped in time. I was thinking of Jay Baker and about how when you know they think of, when folks think of Jay's parents and they think, you know, I mean, they can keep the Baker family in that mold, and then when you see Jay and you hear him and just all the work that he's doing all across for equality, it's just some fantastic stuff. And I think it surprises people when they connect and to hear him talk about his experience in the family, how it's different than what all the media puts out, and it's just interesting, some of that. So there we are.
Well, thanks,
Amanda.
folks. I think that this has been really an awesome session, and I'm thrilled to have been here.
Yay! It was a Bible party.
Yay for
Bible
Finn
party.
coming. Yeah, Bible party.
Yeah.
So have a happy, awesome, fabulous weekend, folks. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sticking through. If you made it all the way through, kudos to you.
Yeah, good job. My
Yes.
wife and probably no one else.
My husband, maybe.
Yeah.
He does it sometimes.
Spouses.
I'm not sure anybody's watching mine, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have
Right.
about 60 people who watch every week.
Great.
I don't know how they make it through to the end, but good job.
That's a way to talk. Yeah, I am
You gotta have some sort of reward at the end. Maybe our feet should be up there.
Oh yeah, feet. Actual feet though.
Feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, look at your shoes, Amanda.
Yeah.
Was that
Fancy
Luther's
schmancy.
feet?
Wow.
Fancy schmancy shoes.
Yeah. All right, it
These are
got
gonna be the
weird
best
again.
feet.
Yeah, there
This
are.
is the part of the Bible study where we have to say we better stop or it's going to get way too weird.
Discord.
Because it
feet.
hasn't already. Anyway,
No.
Thanks, folks.
Anyway.
Have a great
Be well.
day.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.